So it's a new year. We got 3 weeks today and 2 more weeks to work on a little bit of stuff. So we're not going to be in Acts. And today we'll probably not get to opening our Bible because this will be a bit of an introduction. Then next week we'll deal with some text. But what better way to start off a new year than a pop quiz? I got a 10 question. Most of these are multiple choice or true or false. So this is low stakes, high reward. You're going nowhere, good sir.
He has to use the bathroom.
That's a likely excuse.
I'm getting ready to say Jesus.
Jesus is the answer.
I don't think Jesus is the answer to any of these questions. However, I will say that these next 3 weeks that we're going to talk about the heavenly hierarchy, how is heaven structured in a very general sense? We're not going to get very detailed. I just want you to pick up on the broad pictures of particularly the Old Testament that the New Testament is assuming. I taught this to teenagers multiple times. I gave this quiz to teenagers multiple times. Teenagers can get a 10 out of 10. This is pretty much the review of the lesson that you said you watched this morning, so you should be able to follow it. There may be a question or two that came from a previous taught lesson that didn't show up on that lesson. So, you know, I'm just saying this isn't supposed to break your brain. This is supposed to be a nice, quick, and easy review.
Well, you called us suckers, so I mean.
Called you what?
Suckers.
Yeah. Again, that was for teenagers originally. You're just grandfathered into being called suckers. So, review question number 1. What is a god according to the thinking of the ancient world, including the biblical authors? A, is it wood, stone, and precious metals shaped into a statue? B, any being that inhabits the celestial realm? C, an omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent being? Or D, peanut butter?
Oh, B!
The answer, of course, is B.
I like D. Peanut butter.
As it turns out, peanut butter is not the definition of an Elohim.
I like D. That's a good answer.
George Washington Carver was not around in biblical times. He had not yet discovered the uses of peanuts, including peanut butter. But yes.
No, it would have been halva.
Halva?
Yeah.
I don't know what halva is. Is that a food?
It's basically.
I know shawarma.
It's like sesame seeds peanut butter. It's a
Oh,
very
okay.
thick paste.
Oh, see?
Sweet and really thick. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Peanut butter apples. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's good, but
So the
strangely dry in your mouth.
the real paradigm shift that we need to make as modern Americans is that they did not define a God anywhere in the ancient world the way that we define a God. We define a God basically, if we went back to the question itself, we would define a God as number C. They define a God as number B. Anything that's immortal and non-physical, anything that is physical is immortal. You cannot kill it the way that you can a human. It doesn't have any inherent physical form. If you destroy its physical form because a celestial being shows up to you and you destroy its physical form, it's going to go on existing in a non-physical form. And you haven't damaged it whatsoever. So that's a God. That's all a God is, an immortal being that's really a resident of the non-physical universe. So what Hebrew word is most commonly used for celestial beings in the Old Testament? Yes, the answer is C. Elohim. Elohim is just the broad category marker in Hebrew to describe the fact that you're talking about a God. The word literally translates to God. And so it just is the broad category marker for saying you're talking about an inhabitant of the celestial realm. You don't know, with the word itself, you don't know which God you're talking about, which celestial being you're talking about. And, you know, and I use celestial beings instead of spiritual beings because I think our modern language of spiritual is too jargony. We don't know what we mean by it. It's too broad, and we don't know when we're talking about spiritual, are we talking about non-physical? Are we talking about emotional? Are we talking about the Spirit of God? Something related to the Spirit of God? It's a little bit too broad. So I use the term celestial to refer to beings in the celestial realms.
Well, also, if you're referring to humans as spiritual beings, then it precludes them from being Elohim because we're here.
Exactly. And this word is just trying to tell you you're talking about beings from another realm. the celestial realm, the heavenly realm, as is the word that will pop up in the Old Testament. Okay, true or false? In the Hebrew language, Elohim is always spelled in the plural.
True.
The answer is true. Yes. If you see I am at the back of a word, it's in Hebrew, that's a plural. They don't use an S to pluralize. They use I am. Well, it's one of the ways is I am. This is the third masculine plural. But anyways, true or false? Despite the plural spelling of Elohim, it can be used for Israel's single God, Yahweh, in the Old Testament.
True.
True. If you look at Psalm 82, the first verse, and you read it in Hebrew, it refers to both God's singular and the God's plural in the same sentence. It works both ways. The question is, how does it work? So, what determines if Elohim is singular in meaning? A, the grammatical context. B, the verb is attached to Elohim as singular. C, the adjective attached to the noun as singular. Or D, all of the above.
D.
The correct answer is D, all of the above.
Always.
It's well, when I originally wrote this question, it was designed to trick up teenagers, because when I say the grammatical context, both of these are grammatical context.
Oh.
So you should be able to pick up from context clues that it has to be D. But it was a bit of
as much standardized testing as we have,
it was
so
a
they
bit
don't
of a
know the
test.
rules.
It was a bit of a test when I wrote the question to see if they could just pick it up from context clues. Between this type of quiz and Jeopardy that I used to do with teenagers, it was a great review. But yeah, they could get 10 out of 10 on this easily enough. I'm not trying to trick anybody. I'm just trying to review content and move on. It's true or false? Yahweh is an Elohim.
Yes.
That is true. You are correct, Lyle. Which of these is not referred to as an Elohim in the Bible? A, God. B, living humans. C, dead humans. D, angels. D, demons. E, angels. F, cherubim. G, the gods and goddesses of other nations.
B.
The correct answer is B. Because God is an Elohim, God is a resident of the celestial realm. Angels, demons, cherubim, we'll talk about what these categories are as much as we can over the next few weeks. The gods and goddesses of other nations, they're all just inhabitants. We don't know how many numbers there are in the celestial realm, and so Elohim is a category title that encompasses all of these. These are basically job descriptions, as we'll get into over the next few weeks. And yes, living humans is the only group that you will probably hear about at some point from somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about in a pulpit, that will interpret something like Psalm 82 and think that, these are these Elohim that are being judged by Elohim. These gods that are being judged, those are just Jewish humans on earth or something, or they're the rulers of nations or something. No, Elohim is never living humans. It cannot refer to living humans. It can and does refer to dead humans. When the witch of Endor summons up Samuel for Saul, she refers to Samuel as an Elohim. What do you see? It looks like an Elohim. It looks like a spirit being. I don't know what to tell you, because I don't know any more who this guy is or what's happening, but it looks like a god coming up here, some inhabitant of the non-physical realm. Okay, true or false? There is no difference between Yahweh and other celestial beings. False. Yahweh is a celestial being. He is an Elohim, but other celestial beings are not Yahweh. He alone is holy, holy, holy. He is holy and completely other in his character, his identity, his being, his ontology. This is where you get the omni qualities: omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience. All that stuff comes from the descriptive distinctives between Yahweh and other Elohim, and why Yahweh is the only Elohim we're meant to worship. By the way, let me go back to this question. If dead humans can be referred to as Elohim, and the commandment is, you shall have no other Elohim before me, what are branches of Christianity doing praying to dead saints?
I mean, it's idolatry.
Yes, it is. But see how learning this can actually help you understand why we don't pray to saints? Dead humans are now inhabitants of the celestial realm. The only celestial representative that you're supposed to pay attention to is Yahweh, because he's a holy and completely other than all of them.
To be fair, and I don't pray to saints, so this is just for argument's sake. They don't pray to any dead human. It's dead humans who they believe have been imbued with celestial qualities through the performance of miracles, which is supposed to be their transference of spiritual power from heaven directly to earth.
So how does the communication with them happen?
I don't know. I'm not Catholic.
Okay, well, fair enough.
But,
My
because-
point being, it refers to the same basic stuff as under the law why you're not supposed to perform witchcraft. The reason you don't reach out to other beings in the celestial realm of any category, you reach out to no celestial being in the celestial realm because they can reach back.
Right.
Or at least dead humans can't,
Mhm.
except for Saul and the witch of Endor. Drawing up Samuel. That was a special circumstance to shut Saul up and tell him his judgment. But higher Elohim, higher celestial beings can reach back. And the ones that will reach back are the ones who are no longer obeying Yahweh. They will lead you astray. The reason you're not supposed to do anything and reach out to any inhabitant or communicate with any inhabitant of the celestial realm is not because you can't. It's because the ones that will talk back to you and pretend to be the ones you're trying to talk to are the ones who will rip your life to shreds, which is why you pay attention to none of them except Yahweh. And if he sends any of the other celestial beings to show up in your life, you say, okay, thank you, now go away. I got to talk to God about this, the God about this, okay? But I think it's interesting when you learn this language, how it actually helps you process things that in the Middle Ages, when they're working this out in medieval Catholicism, they didn't have these categories, and so they make these category errors, and they develop theological paradigms based off these category errors, as do we. Our language of angels and demons is not near sufficient enough to parse out what is going on in the Old Testament in particular, but what the New Testament is assuming as its background. And the Messiah's work is happening in light of this, what we call spiritual warfare, between rebellious angels and demons, if we want to use that language, and the one true God, Yahweh, and those who are still loyal to him. Plus, we have another problem. We read Paradise Lost into the Bible. We're more familiar with the story that John, I've forgotten his last name, wrote Paradise Lost, the poem. 16th century.
John Locke.
No, John Locke was a philosopher.
Paradise Lost was Dante, wasn't it?
No, the Divine Comedy was Dante.
Okay.
Google Paradise Lost and John. I forgot. I'm blanking on his last. Milton. Thank you.
Yes.
John Milton, English Puritan. John Milton's whole point was he wanted to write an epic like Dante did.
Right.
He knew he wasn't telling history, but people read this war in heaven between Satan, a third of his angels, because they misread Revelation, that he put into this poetic language and made into an epic narrative. They read that as if it's in the Bible. It's not. And so one of the things you should do is actually go read Paradise Lost by John Milton and realize, okay, this is where this narrative came from 400 years ago. Throw that out. That is not what the idea of angels and demons comes from. It's like Satan gets cast out of hell. He gets thrown into the underworld with his demons. And then he's like, but you know what? Remember that prophecy that said man was going to come? I'm going to sneak up there and I'm going to deceive them and I'm going to bring them down. And it's like, it's a whole narrative background that doesn't exist in the Bible. And the ancients that wrote the Bible didn't share that because it didn't exist for 1,600 years after the text was done being written. And if you could pick up in history and study in history where ideas came from, you realize, oh, a lot of the ideas that I have are not the ideas that the biblical authors have. I need to maybe at least question this, maybe not throw it out right away, but at least question it and try to understand what the authors were thinking. The language of Elohim is what they were thinking. And it's not difficult to pick up on it, but most people who stand in a pulpit don't even know this information. 2 questions left. True or false? Celestial beings are image bearers of God. I don't think I referred to this in that last lesson.
Did not.
So think about this one. Are they image bearers of God?
No. Yeah, I would say false.
We got 2 false. False. Liz? Oh, okay. And a non-committal. The answer is true.
I'm not going to pop quizzes.
See, sorry?
I'm not going to pop quizzes.
Oh. You didn't know I was starting the year off with one, did you? Because when God is talking in creation and he says, let us make man in our image, he's talking to his divine counsel. He's talking to a celestial family. This is what we're going to look at. after we look at categories and stuff of how heaven is structured, God uses a council. He doesn't just govern alone. He gives power away. And the same thing that he does in the celestial realm is what he's building in physical form in creation. So when he says, let us make man in our image, you've probably been conditioned to think that that's God talking to the Trinity. But the Trinity doesn't talk to each other. Their communication goes way, way deeper than that. And the closest that you come to God talking to each other is during the incarnation, where Jesus prays and God responds, hey, God, glorify your name. And God says, I have glorified it. And Jesus turns right around and says, yeah, he didn't say that to me. I didn't need to hear that. That was for you guys. It's like, no, the Trinity's communication goes beyond words. Their connection, their intimacy, their being on a wholly and completely different level does not need to talk out loud. And in no place in the Bible do we ever even find the authors using literature to express their communication that way. God doesn't talk to his spirit. He just reveals what their spirit has decided or something. But we see no conversations going on among the Trinity. And you should understand as we go through this that when God speaks in the plural, let we, us, he is talking to his divine family, his celestial family, his Elohim that work for him.
So what do you mean by image bearer?
Exactly. That's the question. So in Genesis 1, 26, 27, when he says, let us make man in our image, and let them do what?
So then they may rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, and all the wild animals.
Okay. Let us make man in our image and let them rule. To be an image bearer means that you have God's authority, a stamp of authority over you. As a human, we have it in the physical world. But the reason he says, let us make man in our image and give them the right and ability to rule in the physical realm is because he's talking to his council who helps him administrate and rule in the celestial realm. Yahweh is, and I'll get to this as the weeks go by, Yahweh is not a tyrant. He gives power and authority away. But being the ultimate power, he can dole it out as he wishes and he can take it away from anybody that misuses it. But because he's a good king gives power away and invests it in other people to help administrate and rule. This is the way that they're understanding Yahweh based on kingship in the Old Testament. Kings had councils. They would sit around these tables and they would say, Lord so-and-so who rules over the seas in my name. What do you think? And they would give the input. We'll look at scenes in the Bible where this is happening. Prophets are men and women, but we only see the signs, the scenes from men in the Bible. Prophets are men who are humans on earth who get glimpses into the celestial realm where this is happening. And then they have to report in the world what the celestial council ruled by Yahweh has actually reported they're going to do on earth. That's what is constantly going on when prophets say, yeah, we'll look at the end of 1 Kings 22 or 2 Kings 22. The prophet Micaiah, he comes to the king of Israel and the king of Judah, and he's mocking the king of Israel because he never listens to a thing he says anyways. It's like if it weren't for the king of Judah, I wouldn't even be paying attention to you right now. But let me tell you, since you asked, let me tell you what it's all. I was in the council meeting where God declared that you're going to go up and die. And he said, God said he wanted you to die, and then he said, now how are you guys going to do it? And one spirit came forward, one Elohim came forward and says, I'll do it this way. Another Elohim came forward this way. And then finally an Elohim came forward and says, I'll be a lying mouth in the tongue of his prophets. And he says, great, that'll work. Go out and do that. And so now I'm here reporting that I was there. I saw the spirits of God figure out how they were going to work out God's decree, and God picked the one that he knew was going to work best on you. So you're going to sit here and you're going to listen to these lying prophets, and you're going to go up to battle when you should not, and you're going to die. And you know what? That's exactly what happened. Because that's what prophets are fundamentally doing. And if you can understand this, you can read their books and understanding they're just reporting what's going to happen on earth because God and his council had decreed what's going to happen in the heavens. Final question. Does the Bible teach monotheism?
No. Yes and no.
Modern definitions?
Good, exactly. Answer, it depends on what you mean when you refer to a God. The popular definition of monotheism from the 1600s where John Milton is writing Paradise Lost in the post-rationalistic, ever-changing society, is that there's only one God exists. Popular definition of polytheism from the same time is that multiple gods exist. The problem with using such an overly simplistic and modern term is that the ancients had no problem believing in multiple gods because there was an unknown number of beings inhabiting the celestial realm. Look up at the night sky, count the stars if you can. Because the stars were their category titles for gods, celestial beings, beings in the heavens. Heavens and sky are the same thing in Hebrew terms. Also spelled always plural, the word is shamayim. Anyways, Israel makes the claim that their Elohim, Yahweh, was unlike all the other Elohim, unlike all the other gods. He created the other Elohims, the other beings, and he rules over them as their king. He gives them purpose, he gives them power. They are his image bearers, and he calls them to account and judgment if and when they rebel, which is what Psalm 82 is. So biblical monotheism, if you wanted to use the term monotheism, biblical monotheism is the belief that Yahweh is one and only, the one and only being in existence of his kind, of his class, of his ontology, of his nature. If you're saying that, yeah, you're talking about monotheistic belief. You're conforming to what the Jews said about Yahweh, right, in the text. He alone possesses certain qualities that set him apart from all other beings, celestial and terrestrial. Terrestrial just being the term for physical, human beings. He's omnipotent, he's omnipresent, he's omniscient, he's uncreated, he's infallible, he's incorruptible, he's many more qualities that the other Elohim do not possess. Recognizing these distinctions have led some to label the ancient Israelites as henotheists, meaning the belief in multiple gods, but they only worship a single God as the supreme God. There's even this is not exactly a helpful category title, because you could research a lot of different ancient cultures and realize they were basically henotheists by that. It's like saying Zeus is Lord of the gods, so let's just worship Zeus to the ignorance, or not the ignorance, to the exclusion of Ares and Hades and Poseidon and Aphrodite and all the other stuff. It's not quite the same, because they're not making the same things about Zeus that the Hebrews are making about Yahweh. Zeus is just in the same category as all the other gods, right? He's just first and foremost among that pantheon. So today, and for the next 2 weeks, we want to look at this. God orders the celestial realm hierarchically into 3 major categories of celestial beings. The sons of God, or the divine council, are the highest rankers. The angels down here third are proper, angel proper, if we use the term properly. They're just messengers, low-ranking celestial beings that run messages and do tasks for all the higher-ranking gods who sit on thrones. And Yahweh being the highest-ranking God, they work for Yahweh, including the sons of God. Okay, we'll talk about this. You don't have to freak out at the language. In between these 2 categories, we're going to talk about cherubim. Seraphim and cherubim are the same thing. Seraphim only show up in Isaiah 6. They're the same thing as cherubim. We'll talk about why 2 weeks from today. They are just the guardians of sacred space. Most cultures in the ancient world had some version of it. We'll talk about where the language comes from and what these things mean. You could look at Dr. Heiser's work on the Divine Council. Supernatural is his simplified, summarized book of the unseen realm. It's like that thick. It's not very difficult to read, but it will help you deal with subject matter you don't know about. He's also got an angels and demons book. He was a linguist, so he gets pretty technical in his language, because you need to be technical if you're going to talk about angels properly. You're going to talk about demons properly. And what they are. The word for demons only shows up 3 times in the Old Testament. 2 of them are in the same chapter. And so you've got these resources that are written on YouTube. You could go to the Logos page, and you could find his playlist on angels, where he just sits and discusses angels. And it's basically his work on the angels book. There's like 12, 15 videos that are 8 to 15 minutes long each. But he goes through the content of the Angels book. The Angels book is not very thick. I think the Demons book is probably his overall thickest, if not the Unseen Realm. He also had the podcast, Naked Bible Podcast, that where he walks through that. He calls it the Naked Bible Podcast because he's not interested in your traditions or your expectations. He wants to strip the Bible of later context, like John Milton's Paradise Lost, and actually get into the biblical content of what he's trying to help you think. What did the people who wrote the text think about, and how did they express that thought? So he's probably one of the best resources. He passed away almost 3 years ago in February, I think, or 2 years ago in February. So he's not putting out more resources, but these are like, start with Supernatural and just get the summary in your head. Watch the Angels videos, and then you can listen to the Naked Bible podcast, and you could work your way and start tackling these more technical stuff in these books.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
Demons.
I know you said that it only appears 3 times in our accepted Bible. Is this something that is more commonly referenced in books that are not included in our Bible now? Like other Hebraic texts?
I would say yes, especially the further in history you go. The more you move forward, the more they wrote about it.
Okay.
But their language shifts and changes all the time. They go through exile and they come back. I mean, the Hebrew lettering that we use is based on Babylonian lettering itself. So it's not the way they would have written Hebrew, say, in Moses' time. So they update, they change spellings and stuff. And so a guy like Dr. Heiser is somebody who's been through all of that research and concluded what they meant when they wrote, for instance, Deuteronomy, where you see Shadim show up at least twice and maybe all 3 times. I don't really remember. But where the term shows up, it's like, okay, during the time of Moses, they would have used this term and meant kind of this. By the time they're updating Deuteronomy and writing its final form that we have, they mean that and a little bit extra and a little bit more here. But by the time you're reading First Enoch, if you wanted to read First Enoch, a very important Second Temple book, when they're talking about watchers and demons, watchers shows up in Daniel. Which category of watchers do they mean? You have to break it down. So you have to start with, this is the point that I'm trying to make. You have to start with not just assuming that you understand what an angel is because you know what that term means, or what a demon is. These are both Greek transliterations of angelos and daimonium, whatever. And so we don't really, that stuff gets lost in translation. But when you go back and you actually look at stuff in the context, and you just work through commentaries and tools that will help you parse out the context, you don't even have to care about the language directly. You will see that just because they're using the word angel doesn't necessarily tell you good or bad beings that they're talking about. When they're using the term shadim or demons, yeah, they mean evil Elohim. But which group? From which rebellion? You have to talk about different rebellions. You know, where do they show up? Why is God? Which group in Psalm 82 is God judging? Because he doesn't mention anything about a Satan character and stuff. Where does the idea that Satan is chief of the demons show up? It's not actually in the Old Testament. It is an extra biblical text from Second Temple Judaism, and it is in Paul in the New Testament where he calls the serpent of old the Satan character and stuff. So they're expanding their mind as time goes on, and their language is expanding. And then the New Testament authors are like in the middle of that process. And it's not always clear, especially if you don't know what their stories are and where they've come from, what stories they're thinking in the back of their mind, not John Milton's Paradise Lost, what they're thinking of as the chief demon or powerful demons or anything. So it's good to be familiar with extra biblical stories because they're in the minds of the New Testament authors. They're in the minds of the Old Testament authors to a lesser extent. But they're helping them categorize what they're talking about in a specific verse. Most of the time, by the time you hear it from a pulpit, it has been ignored what that author is taking his literary inspiration from and how he's using his language, and they just collapse it down to angels and demons. That's not helpful to actually read in detail what the Bible is trying to say, what Messiah's job in overcoming these celestial rebels is. Another source that you could use on YouTube, just go to the Bible Project. And specifically, they got a lot of good stuff. I really like the Bible Project. Specifically, they have a playlist, Satan, angels, cherubim, demons, and Elohim or spiritual beings, whatever they are. And they've got 7 or 8 different videos. I think the longest one's probably about 7 minutes. And the shortest one is like 3, where they talk about Elohim. They talk about what spiritual beings are and what they're like, learning about hidden forces guiding the world, angels and cherubim. I'm going to be using Dr. Heiser's work and the Bible Project's work in videos to show you examples to saying, Chuck's not just making this up. I've done my best to try and research this since I got out of seminary, because they didn't teach me this in seminary, how all of this actually works in the minds of the ancient authors.
A question about that though. Why are they not teaching this in seminary? Like I get from the pulpit, you're
Thank you.
teaching,
It was,
you're trying to give out digestible impact on your life every day lessons, right? In seminary, aren't you supposed to be digging into this?
Supposed-
so is this
supposed to be.
right?
One,
Okay, so
one of the problems is that seminaries are founded by denominations. A little bit
Sure.
different from a divinity school, right? Where if you wanted to open a school of theology or a divinity school, you'd basically be free from denominational constraints and you could study as you want. High risk, high reward, because they tend to go much more liberal, much faster. Because if you can study anything you want, you don't have necessarily any safeguards against bad theology. Seminaries, because they're founded by denominations, have more safeguards, but the trade-off is they don't teach the text, they teach their denomination's interpretation of the text,
right.
which can be too limiting. So divinity schools and seminaries need to be in conversation with each other, saying seminaries need to open up and learn a little bit more than just what their denomination is taught. Divinity schools need to shut some stuff off that's bad and out there, and they need to really be learning from each other. So this is why when I went to an undergrad that was a Southern Baptist undergrad, you didn't learn any of this, because this is not what Baptists typically talk about and think. They talk in categories of angels and demons, and only angels and demons, because that's what their denomination was founded on in the 1600s and has historically taught for 400 years. This is why I understood this, not necessarily about angels and demons, but I understood I wasn't getting the full biblical picture by just going to a Southern Baptist undergrad. So when I was making my choice for graduate school, I decided I wasn't going to go to an SBC seminary. So I went to an evangelical seminary that was unaffiliated with any specific evangelical denomination. Denver Seminary taught me to think in terms of Presbyterian, Baptist, Lutheran, Methodist, Catholics to a lesser extent, and Greek Orthodox to an even lesser extent than that. But I wanted a more well-rounded understanding of what Christianity is taught in various places at various times and why that is. And come to find out, places like the Bible Project or Dr. Heiser, they did the same thing in their time. They did the same research and realized that they had to branch out from just what their local church was teaching if they wanted to actually get into what the scriptures were teaching. Not one and the same thing. All any teacher or pastor can do is the best that they can. But I think too many seminaries give out MDivs, and then those pastors stop learning once they get out of formal education. This is a lot of mostly stuff that I've learned since I got out of seminary, because I didn't study this stuff in seminary, because they teach you, well, how are you going to lead a local church? How are you going to pay attention to people's problems? How are you going to preach? And the best ones will give you options. Most of them are going to just tell you enough that you can get a job and get by. And most people are okay with that. I was not. And I find that in my experience in local churches, if you will just broach the subject with most people are intellectually curious enough to give this a shot, which is why, I give you options. You can go to books and you can learn books, or you can go to websites and learn off good websites. You can listen to podcasts, you can read good literature, or you can watch good videos somewhere on the internet and at least start getting the ideas and start asking the questions. And if you can just start asking the questions, you can at least start the process of answering those questions. You can't answer questions you don't ask. Now, to close us off here in the last few minutes here, we're going to look at the hierarchy of heaven. And in broad respect, it can look like this. Yahweh is the king and creator of all the Elohim. He's at the top of the pyramid. He sits at the top of the hierarchy. That's obvious. Underneath him, immediately underneath him, are called the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. The divine council, as they're often summarized in various places, or there are other terms, but we'll stick primarily to this one, and the sons of God or the divine council. Underneath them, these are ones that show up in scenes, and they can possibly be sitting on their own thrones, even in front of God, sitting on his throne. We'll talk about what that looks like and what that means. But there's also these angels, which just is a term that means messenger. And they're the ones who the council's like, okay, we're agreed on what we're going to do. Great. You, and you go out and do this. And they run the errands or send the messages to humans based on that. This is not an exhaustive list. I'm not trying to be exhaustive. I'm trying to give you the biggest, broadest categories possible. There is, however, another category that we could talk about, that we will talk about if we have time, cherubim and seraphim. But the question is, where do they go on the list? Because in some biblical scenes, they look like they're standing right in front of Yahweh, and the sons of God are around them, and then the angels are further out than that. Other times it's like Yahweh and then his immediate divine counsel, and then the cherubim are on the other side of the sons of God, and then the angels, and still other times, we probably won't get to flush all of these out. The cherubim are like outside the entire council meeting. You know, we call these the divine council, but this entire group is God's council, right? These are just the proper ones that have more authority, so they get the title. Okay, so let me finish up here because I'm running out of time, and I just want to get through these last few slides. Technically, cherubim could be left out of the hierarchy order entirely based on the role that they play as throne guardians. They don't go anywhere. They don't do anything. We'll talk about what their role is, but really, you don't have to put them anywhere here. You just have to know what their function is. However, we're going to look at the hierarchy by next week, talking about the sons of God. Then we'll talk about the cherubim and seraphim. And I expect that because you probably already know enough about angels that I'll just have to spend 5 minutes telling you this is what they technically are, and then that's it. And so I'm not really planning a lesson on angels proper. I'm just planning on talking about the things we don't know enough about in our modern culture to put angels in their proper context at the bottom. There is, however, you could talk about more categories. Could you talk about the military powers? The armies of heaven show up places. Does heaven have an army? Or is that metaphorical for places elsewhere? What about, for instance, and I don't even have a slide on here for this, what about the angel of Yahweh, who's equal with Yahweh in the Old Testament? You know, where does he prop up? Is he supposed to be up here? Is he supposed to be in a category by himself? And you have to ask yourself these questions. We're not going to talk about military powers. We're not going to talk about the angel of Yahweh. I just want you to know I recognize that those categories and questions are there.
Man, I was going to be miffed if you didn't mention that.
And I'm not going to talk about them in these lessons. I'm giving you the broadest categories, the sons of God. We'll talk about cherubim, and then we'll talk about the angels, and we'll just keep that much in play because the military powers don't show up often enough, I think, to matter either way. But if you looked at the entire structure of the way the cosmos is supposed to be, Yahweh at the top, his heavenly celestial powers here, then humanity, his image bearers, and then animals like the physical realm down here, humanity's at the top of the physical realm and stuff. If you can understand that this is the way things are supposed to be, you can start to understand why in Genesis 1 through 11, step by step, it's not that way. Because celestial beings and us terrestrial beings constantly rebel against the King, Yahweh. Question.
Okay. In modern today, many people believe it's Yahweh, angels, the messengers, or the messengers are the armies, and then humanity. There's no council, there's no all that. So that's just a thought.
Oh wait, I'm on the side. So you're saying a lot of people just kind of collapse these all down into one category?
Yeah. Or you take out the divine council. They just see Yahweh or a God at the top.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You're probably right. And this is why we want to spend time talking about that, because angels is basically a job description. Go run messages. Go run quick tasks. The sons of God is also the language of a job description. Sit and make decisions the way the king and his council would sit and make decisions. But there was also in the ancient world, there were military powers, right? And so that's your job description. This is all language of job descriptions. The cherubim, seraphim in Isaiah 6, is a job description of the guardians of sacred space. We'll talk about that.
I always thought of them as like district managers for angels.
And see, that's not the job description
Yeah.
in the ancient
But
world.
I mean,
And so
I've always lumped those in with angels for that reason.
the district managers would mostly be the sons of God,
Probably,
if you wanted to use that language.
Mhm.
And so that's the thing. The language that the Old Testament gives us for each of these categories is telling us this is what the celestial beings, this Elohim's job is. And they are actually ranked. There is some distinction between who's writing and where they tend to put things hierarchically, which is why we're sticking with the idea that it's Yahweh, the sons of God, and the angels. And we're only going to briefly mention this one because they move around, and we're not going to touch the military powers at all. The physical world is hierarchically structured. You can't get around that. You have authority over your children, and you expect your children to obey because that's how authority works. It keeps chaos at bay in human relationships. But the idea of the Old Testament is that as in heaven, so on earth. Earth is structured hierarchically because the non-physical universe, the celestial realm, is structured hierarchically. Everybody has a role to play. Every image bearer has power. You have to express that power in your role. The church is structured hierarchically as much as it is communally with you call them councils, committees. A committee is just a council. It's another word for it. It's the people that have been elected and voted upon to sit on the council and make decisions in that particular realm of thought. Well, Yahweh elected himself who was going to sit on his council and who was going to run messengers. He elected that humanity would rule the physical realm. And out of that, he elects kings. He elects priests and prophets and gives them special privileges that come with special responsibilities. And if you fail in those responsibilities, then comes the privilege of judgment. So maybe we don't want to ignore authority, which is something that's becoming more extensive in our progressive ideology as it seeps into community. We want to do away with all authority, and we want to make the self the authority. That's not going to work if you're going to live biblically, because the authorities above you ultimately come down to Yahweh as the ultimate authority, the archetypal authority beyond all authority, the one to whom there is no authority above him. And you could break down Yahweh's category and say, well, there's God the Father, there's God the Son, and God the Spirit, we would say. And you could talk about how do they function? Because God the Son is in submission to God the Father during the incarnation. And then yet Paul talks in 1 Corinthians 15 about the fact that when the kingdom is summarized and everything comes up again, he'll be in subordination to the Father again and turn everything back over to the Father. Authority is not an evil thing. Authority is meant to serve a purpose and a function. Now, with the last few minutes here, I got one quick video that I want you to see. I think this one's from the Bible Project. And so I want you just to watch this real quick, and this will be the end.
The Bible, you don't have to read far before you meet the main character, God.
Yeah, he appears in the Bible's first sentence. And then later on page 1, you meet the humans.
And there you have it. The two main players in the Bible, God and humans on the stage of our world.
Well, not quite. In the Bible, there's actually a way bigger cast of characters than just humans and God.
Like who?
I mean the figures called the Elohim in the Hebrew scriptures. Angels, the Satan, demons, they're all over the story.
Oh, right. Spiritual beings. To be honest, I've never really known what to do with them. It's all kind of weird.
And unfortunately, almost all of our modern conceptions about these beings are based on serious misunderstandings.
All right, so let's talk about spiritual beings in the story of the Bible.
So first thing we have to do is reorient ourselves to how the ancient biblical authors saw the world. On pages 1 and 2 of Genesis, God brings order to a watery wilderness, separating the skies above from the land below.
Right, this is Earth, where we live, and then there's the heavens high above, which they saw as God's domain.
But in the Bible, these spaces are not separate. They overlap. And in fact, the Garden of Eden is described throughout the Bible as a high mountain garden where heaven and earth are one.
Cool.
So that's the world. Now it needs some creatures. God first creates and appoints the sun, moon, and stars to rule the day and night.
You mean the giant flaming gas balls in the sky?
Well, that's how you think about them. But the biblical authors, like all ancient people, saw them as heavenly creatures that are glorious, shining bright, and high above.
Which is strange. I don't think of stars as creatures.
Well, you don't. But for the biblical authors, the stars formed their categories for thinking and talking about a spiritual reality that exists alongside ours. And it's a different kind of reality, just like the sky is different from the land. And it's populated with creatures that have different kinds of bodies, shiny spiritual bodies.
Okay, so almost all ancient cultures thought of the stars as divine beings, including the ancient Israelites.
But the biblical authors make clear that these beings are not God. Rather, they're images of God. Their glory and high status is a reflection of the Creator's glory and status, and they exist to serve His purposes.
So the stars symbolize beings who are like God's heavenly staff team.
Right. Now let's go back, because after God appointed the heavenly host, He also appointed another type of creature.
The humans.
Yeah, in Hebrew they're called Adam, which sounds like the Hebrew word for dirt because that's what they're made of.
So glorious rulers above and hairy sapiens below.
But then comes the great twist. God tells the lowly humans that they are to rule all of creation. He invites them to rise above their dirty origins and share in God's glory as His partners.
So God wants to rule the world through humans and not the spiritual beings.
Exactly. This is how the poet of Psalm 8 understood the stories of Genesis. He looked up at the stars and says,
"What is humanity that you consider him? You made him lower than the spiritual beings, but crowned him with glory and divine majesty."
This is humanity's high calling, to rule creation in the love and power of God.
When most people think about the story of the Bible, they think of a story about God and humans.
But remember, we learned that there's a whole other cast of characters that appears throughout the Bible and plays a really important role.
Oh, right. Spiritual beings, angels, demons, and the like.
Right. And in the Bible, they inhabit the heavenly realm, which is parallel to our earthly reality and actually overlaps with it.
Now, all of these spiritual beings have their own unique characteristics.
But here's what's fascinating. The biblical authors have one word that can refer to all the inhabitants of the spiritual realm. In Old Testament Hebrew, the word is Elohim, and in New Testament Greek, it's Theos. But here's the thing. This word gets translated in lots of different ways depending on which being is referred to. Angels, gods with a lowercase g, or even God with a capital G.
Wait, so one word can refer to any of these beings?
Yeah. It's because Elohim is a category title. It can designate any spiritual being that belongs to the heavenly realm.
Okay, a title, not a name. Like the word mom.
Yeah, right. The word mom can refer to lots of really different kinds of people, but they all share in common the same role in a family. And then let's say a group of brothers and sisters are talking, and one says, "Hey, it's Mom's birthday." They're using the title like it's a name.
But it would be clear that they're referring not to any mom, but their mom.
Yes, and the same goes for the biblical authors. They called their God Yahweh, which is the name revealed to Moses, but they also sometimes refer to him with the category title Elohim, using it like a name, because they all know who they're referring to.
Okay, but don't the biblical authors think that Yahweh's in a class of his own, not like any other?
They do, which is why they say things like Yahweh is the Elohim of Elohim. That is, the chief Elohim among all the others. Or they'll say, there's no Elohim beside Yahweh, meaning no other spiritual being compares to him, because only he is the ruler and creator of all things.
Okay, I'm following, but I thought the Bible taught monotheism, which means there's just one God.
Well, the biblical authors are claiming that among all of the spiritual beings out there, only one is the source and creator of all things, including the Elohim. That's biblical monotheism, that one Elohim, Yahweh, is above all other Elohim, that is, the other spiritual beings.
There you go. We'll continue to break this down over the next 2 weeks. Next week, we'll talk about the sons of God and the divine council. And we'll look at some actual text to back it up and talk about what the language means. Okay. Thank y'all very much.